she in the nursery or is she coming in?
I didn't bring up Lisa, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I guess I should let her know that if she'll bring it.
Dory.
Well, we'll go ahead and get started. If others filter in, that's fine. I know several had mentioned they won't be here for different reasons, but we're starting our study tonight, and this will be a fun one to talk about, but the future weeks will be even more fun. Starting a study on the book of Job, and I promise you all, and I'm going to keep my word, that we are not going chapter by chapter and verse by verse through Job. As a matter of fact, towards the end of our message tonight, I'll kind of share with you the next about 3 or 4 weeks or so that we'll be in Job. There's 42 chapters. If we just took one chapter a week, it would take us into next year, and we're not going to do that, I promise. The middle of the book is very repetitive in a lot of ways, kind of escalating, and we'll talk about that tonight. So we're going to hit some highlights, some themes, some questions that Job raises, and see if the Bible answers them. So tonight we're just going to be in the book of Job, chapters 1 and 2, and kind of do an introduction about the book of Job. Kind of do a summary, if you will. Maybe just kind of talk about what the book is about. We won't read all 42 chapters. Instead, we're just going to read the first 2 chapters. So let's just start off by doing that. Let's read chapters 1 and 2 together. If you have your Bible, you can follow along. I did, because I'm using the screen for something else here tonight. I will have the verses up there. I put them so you can follow along your copy of God's Word or follow along with me if you would like. So let's see. Job chapter 1. Let's just read the first 2 chapters. So it's kind of lengthy. Read along with me. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did this continuously. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "Fire from God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they're dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job rose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Let's read chapter 2 as well. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, sound familiar, and Satan also came with them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, from where have you come? And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, all that a man has, he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all the evil that had come upon him, they came each from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. And they made an appointment together to come to show sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept. And they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. No one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. So we read these first 2 chapters of Job, so we kind of get a context of what's happening. We kind of understand the story, and really these first 2 chapters give us the main idea of the book, that Job was a very wealthy man who lost everything. But it also raises a lot of questions. So let's start by looking first at Job the man and see what we learn about who Job is. First of all, and if you have your Bible, you can cheat and look in the verses we just read. Where is Job from?
Land of Uz.
Uz, the merry land of Uz, right? The wonderful land of Uz. What's Oz? Is that what's the song? Yeah, he's from Uz. Where is Uz? Well, we don't really know. There's a pretty good guess that it's somewhere east of Israel. But here's what's important to know. It's not in Israel. This is not a story about an Israelite or a Hebrew or someone from the nation of Israel. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But Job is just a man from Uz. What else do we know about his character? What does it say? He's blameless and upright. How many of you all want to claim that, like Job, you are blameless and upright? Anybody in here want to?
I would like to claim it,
But it wouldn't be true. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of people that we can look at and say they are blameless and upright. You might have someone in your mind who you think is a really good person, or you respect a lot, or even is very godly and moral. But I don't think any of us would claim that anyone is a blameless and upright person. But think about who called him blameless and upright. Well, for starters, the author of the book introduces him that way. But do you notice that God, when speaking to Satan, also calls him blameless and upright? God himself says that he is a morally upstanding individual. What about his relationship with God? What does it say about his relationship with God? He fears God. He turns away from evil. He's someone who has a good relationship with God. He's not just a good person. He's a religious, devoutly religious individual. He's moral because of his faith, we can presume, because he worships the one true God. How many children does Job have? He's got 10 altogether, right? 7 sons and 3 daughters. He seems to be a family man who cares about his kids. How do we know that he cares about his kids? What does he do?
Whenever they get together to party, I guess to celebrate, it says their day. I suppose it would be like a birthday or something. He offers sacrifices in case they have sinned.
Yeah, so it doesn't say that these parties are necessarily bad, but they're gathering together, and he wonders, what if in their gathering together, they do something that might displease God? I'm going to offer sacrifice on their behalf. I'm going to pray for them. I'm going to ask God to forgive them. It seems to me like it's not just their day of like their birthday or special occasion. It seems to me like they rotate from house to house, and when it's this brother's turn, he hosts, and this brother's turn. So it seems to be a constant life of lavish partying, which tells us he's able to do that because what do we know about Job's family and their monetary status?
Very rich.
Loaded, right? As a matter of fact, we get the impression that Job in his time is probably the richest man around. It gives numbers and sheep and how many of his livestock he had and how many of his servants he had. He's got camels, sheep, oxen, donkeys. And it says that he was the greatest of all the people of the East. His children can afford to just move from party to party because they're very wealthy and can pretty much do what they want. Job has everything. He's a family man with a great deal of wealth, and he's someone who genuinely loves the one true God and lives a blameless and upright life. He really is what we all would aspire to be. Maybe the ideal man, if you would, who, if any of us could say, make me like someone in the Bible, just reading these first few verses in Job, we would say, make me like Job before the afflictions come, right? Make me like him. I want to love the Lord. I want to be generous. I want to have a great family that I care deeply about. I want to be blameless and upright. And while you're at it, Lord, bless me with a bunch of wealth. That would be great as well. What about the book itself, the book of Job? It kind of tells us a little bit about the man, just knowing about the book. The book was probably written, let's back up. We have no idea when the book was written. So let's start there. I'm about to say when it was probably written, and the answer really is we make a lot of guesses because it gives us no real clues.
It's considered to be the oldest book, isn't it?
It's considered to be maybe the oldest story, but we'll talk about that here in just a minute. It couldn't have been written first because what we find is it actually quotes Psalms and Proverbs fairly extensively. So it must have been written sometime after those books, you would think, because some of them are word for word quotes from those books. At least they might have been written and compiled at a similar time, if not written afterwards. I think the best guess we can make is while the Israelites were in exile, someone was inspired by God to write the book of Job. Now, that doesn't mean it was written about someone during the exile. When was it written about? Well, it's written in antiquity, in history. Probably takes place around the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We don't know that for sure, but there are clues just by the way he lives and carries on his life and the nature of his wealth. That sounds very similar to the lifestyle that Abraham
Would
had.
one of
Really,
his descendants have written it?
possibly. Really, we have the book gives no clue on who would have written it.
Because I was going to think, who would know the story?
Probably was passed from generation to generation. As a matter of fact, Ezekiel mentions Job, and Ezekiel 14, chapter 14, verse 14, and then again in verse 20, mentions Job alongside of Noah and Daniel. And so we would think, well, Ezekiel must have been written afterwards, but possibly he just heard the story of Job. Probably this was a story that was passed down from generation to generation to generation. Here's what we do know, though. Job most certainly is a true story. It's not just a fable or a parable or an allegory. I have the full confidence that it is about a real man who really suffered the way the book says he suffered. Now, it doesn't have to be. As a matter of fact, Jesus tells elaborate stories, doesn't he, about people who don't exist. They're called parables. His are a little shorter in nature, but there are some people who think the book of Job is one long parable, not about a real event, but about maybe just an illustration. There's a few reasons why I am very confident that it is a true story. First of all, because Ezekiel mentions it, and he mentions Job with two other people. Look at Ezekiel 14:14. It says, even if these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they would deliver, but their own and blah, blah. The context is less important than the list of names. Who are the three men mentioned in Ezekiel 14:14? You can look on the screen. I cheated. Go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
I can get the page. Noah, Daniel. and Job.
All right. So here's your quiz for tonight. Was Noah a real person?
Yes.
Yes. We believe fully he was a real person. Was Daniel a real person?
Yes.
Yes, we know he was a real person. So that asks then, could Job be just a fictional character? Would it make any sense? Not at all. Ezekiel does this once, not once, but twice in verse 20. He does the same thing. He mentions Noah, Daniel, and Job again, and he continues to talk about them as real historical figures. Or how about James? This is kind of what spurred our study into the book of Job. James 5:11 mentions Job as well. It says, behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job and have seen the purpose of the Lord and how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. Now, James could have been referencing a fictional person. Certainly it's not out of the realm of possibility. But in chapter 5, he also mentions the prophets, and he says, consider the prophets. Were the prophets real people or fictional people? Real people. He also mentions, I'm drawing a blank on a name now. Elijah. He also mentions Elijah. Was Elijah a real person or a fictional person? Real. Job is always referenced alongside of real people. And so with that in mind, we can have confidence that this is not just some allegory or some good story to tell, a fable that has a good lesson, but this is a real historical occurrence. Job is a real human being who really suffered the way we read about in Job 1 and 2 and the rest of the book. So what I want to do for the rest of tonight is do a summary of the whole book. We're not going to turn everywhere, just a couple of places, but we're going to look at how the book is broken down, because we're going to ask some questions at the end of tonight that we'll answer in future weeks. It's good to know what the book is about. So Job chapters 1 and 2 we just read are kind of a prologue. Somebody summarize Job chapter 1 and 2 for me. What happens in these two chapters? It's exactly what, did you read my notes right here? Literally, that's a summary. Job loses everything, right? And did he have a little or did he have a lot? He had a lot. I really like when you consider all the things Job loses. There was one thing he doesn't lose, and Tim Hawkins has a little illustration about his wife. And so I just want to share with you a little bit. It's just too funny not to at least mention about Job and his wife. So I'll play this up on the screen for you. I hope it works.
I just got blessed with a good wife. Not every guy has a good wife.
Sorry. I mean, think about Job in the Old Testament. Think about Job's wife. She must have been a real piece of work. I mean, the devil took everything from Job, man. Killed his kids, killed his servants, killed his livestock, covered Job in boils and sores. But his wife did not die. That's saying something right there, isn't it? Like, hey, devil, Job's wife's right over there. I know. Trust me, leave her. I know what I'm doing.
So he gets everything taken away except his wife, right? The wife is left behind. And of course, what do we know about the wife? We only heard one time Job's wife is mentioned. And what does she tell him to do? Curse God and die. Right? She was not someone who was a very godly influence. What we find is Job loses everything, and this is really important for us to recognize. The manner in which he loses everything is not over a period of time, but very quickly, and he's attacked literally by every direction. As you read chapter 1, you first hear of the Sabians who come and kill all his livestock. The Sabians were people who would have been from the south. So he's got enemies coming up from the south, and they wipe everything out, and you hear that phrase repeated over and over again, that nobody survived, and I alone, the servant says, escaped to tell you. And it says, while he was still talking, another servant comes, and he talks about fire being rained down from heaven and wiping off the rest of his livestock. So he's attacked from the south, he's attacked from heaven above, and the servant says, everything's dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he's still talking, another servant comes and says, the Chaldeans, who would have been people from the north. So he's been attacked from the south, from above, from the north. The Chaldeans have come, and they have attacked and killed. While he's still talking, another one comes, and he says, winds have come in from the wilderness. Well, the wilderness would have been to the east. Even if you assume they're to the west, we believe they're from the east. Either way, you've got the north, the south, above. The eastern and westerly winds have come and knocked down the house. Job is being attacked literally from every single direction. It's not as if the devil came in and eased in and thought, let me take something away and see how he feels. He literally lost everything in the manner of a conversation. Right? 4 servants come, and literally the only possessions Job has left are these 4 hired men. That's it. Everything else has been taken away. And his wife is still there. Actually, his health, right? Because he's going to get that taken away here in just a moment. But everything in the span of 4 conversations is gone. And this sets up the problem of the book of Job. And that problem is, why do good people suffer? We're meant to read this and ask the question, why does Job suffer? And spoiler alert, we're going to talk about this in a few weeks, one of the questions we're going to ask, but spoiler alert, the book of Job does not give an answer. And it's kind of frustrating because you read these first 2 chapters and you think, okay, we're going to find out. This is the illustration. Job loses everything. Now we're going to figure out why. That's what the Bible does. It teaches and it instructs. And what we find as we read the book of Job is that we never get a clear answer on why good people suffer. We see in the very next chapter, Satan comes in before God, and again, him and God have a conversation, and God says, consider my servant Job. You've taken everything from him, and look, he's still praising God. He's still blameless and upright. And Satan says, but you've not let me touch his flesh. You've not let me attack his health. When I take that away, then he certainly will curse me. And so God says, have at it. You can do anything you want, just don't kill him. It says he has boils from the bottoms of his feet to the top of his head. And this is kind of disgusting to really think about, but it's meant for us to be grossed out a little bit. That his sores are so bad that he can't keep up with the flaking skin and the dead skin rotting off of him. So he takes a piece of pottery and he's literally just scraping his skin off. And if that turns your stomach a little bit, it's supposed to, right? We're supposed to look and say, this is worse than a normal disease. This is just immense suffering. And it's at that point that Job's wife appears and says, why don't you just curse God and die? These first 2 chapters set up this problem. Why does a good, righteous person suffer such harm? Why does God allow that? And the rest of the book kind of wrestles through this question without a clear answer. But there are 3 men who think they have a really good answer. In chapters 3 through 31 are these conversations with these 3 friends. Their names are Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. All three of them also non-Israelites. This book doesn't have a single Israelite in it as far as we can tell. Not Hebrews, not people who are Jewish descendants, people from Uz and around the area. And they come and they start having conversations with Job. And their conversations follow three assumptions. So follow our logic here, because this is what all their conversation's about. When I give you the first assumption, tell me agree or disagree. Assumption number one, God's character is just and right. Believe that or not? Agree? Agree. Assumption number one, God's character is just. Assumption number two, God's actions in the world are just. Agree or disagree? God acts justly in the world. Agree. We agree as well. So the logical conclusion is assumption number three. Because God is just and he acts justly in the world, if you do what is right, you'll be rewarded. And if you do what is wrong, you will be punished. Does this sound, let me ask the question differently. Does this sound fair to you? This idea, if you do good, you'll be rewarded. And if you do poorly, you'll be punished. Does that sound fair to you?
Well, it sounds fair.
It does sound fair. Actually, this is how we've raised our kids, right? I mean, if we're honest, how many of you all, if your kids came home with really good grades on the report card, got some sort of reward? Anybody? No? None of you guys rewarded your kids for good grades? I got rewarded as a kid if I got good grades. I say if I got good grades, it was very, very infrequent. But when I came home and I had good grades, wasn't anything big, but it was, hey, let's all go out and celebrate for ice cream. You know, it was kind of a good job. You did a good job. Someone does something good in a sport or an athletic achievement, you celebrate it, right? You clap, you yell, you scream, you encourage. What about if your children misbehave? Do you punish your children? Have you ever punished your children? Come on, maybe you didn't reward them, but tell me you punished them, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right, there's this idea, if you do what is right, you will do well. If you do what is wrong, you will be punished. This is fair and just, right? And so these assumptions are, if God is a just God and always does what's fair, and that's how he acts in the world, then it makes sense that if you do good, you will thrive, and if you do poorly, you will suffer. Surely they would have said up to that point in life, before Job lost everything, Job must be an upright and blameless man, because look at all the stuff he has. Look what God's given him. He must be doing good. And over again, these three men are telling him with increasing intensity that Job, if you will do good, you will thrive again. But you must have done wrong to suffer the way you have. Now, I say they're increasingly hostile because they don't start off that way. Did you catch these three friends? The first interaction they have in the entire book? Look in chapter 2, verse 13 again. When we're first introduced to these three men, they find Job, they hardly recognize him, but when they find him in verse 13, it says, they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. We're introduced to these men as really caring and compassionate friends. We see you're hurting. We're just here for you. We've come to bring comfort. We want what's best for you. Honestly, as you start to read chapters 4 and 5 and 6 and so on, now what you find is they start off kind of easy. They start asking questions. Job, what could there possibly be to have led to this? How can we help you get out of this? What is there about you? What has changed in your character? And they start asking these easy questions, much like you might ask a friend. Like a convicting question. Like, can you think of anything that maybe you've done to deserve this? And Job over and over again defends himself. I've done nothing and I'm innocent. Well, the more he says he's innocent, the more hostile they become. You can't be innocent, Job. You had to do something. And so they point out more. And Job says he's innocent. And they point out stronger. And he says he's innocent. And over and over and over again, they go back and forth until you get to chapters 29, 30, and 31. And they're basically yelling at Job saying, you are a sinful, horrible human being. And you've gotten what you've deserved. So they start out compassionate, comforting. And as you read those 30 chapters or so, they get increasingly hostile. Then we're introduced to a fourth friend in chapters 32 through 37, a man named Elihu. Now, Elihu is not from Israel either. It tells us where he's from. I can't remember. I have to look it up in chapter 32. But Elihu is a Hebrew name, and I don't think that's an accident. His name might have been something else, or maybe he had a connection to some Hebrews. My guess is that the author gives him, or even the story gives him, a Hebrew name to tie him into being a righteous person, a child of God. He's very young, but he's very mature, and he's been in the background the whole time. And instead of being hostile against Job, he speaks comforting but also convicting words to Job. The thing about Elihu is he's kept silent for 31 chapters because he was afraid they wouldn't listen to him. He was too young and too immature. And we read in Job 32, verses 6 through 8, his reasoning for why he waited so long to speak to Job. Let's look at Job 32, 6, 7, and 8. It says, and Elihu, the son of Barakah, the Buzzite, there's where he's from, answered and said, I am young in years, and you are aged. Therefore I was timid and afraid to declare my opinion to you. I said, let the days speak, and many years teach wisdom. But it's the spirit in a man, the breath of the Almighty, that makes him understand. So Elihu comes along and he says, I may be young. You may see me as immature. I try to stand back and let the wisdom of your age speak. These three men and Job himself, you're older than me, wiser than me. I didn't want to jump the gun, but now I can't keep quiet. And I love verse 8, right? I thought that the old days and the wisdom came from long life, many years teach wisdom. But he says, it's the spirit in man, right?
Wisdom comes from God.
And that's what he says. It's the breath of the Almighty. It's not just living a long life. It's the breath of the Almighty that makes him understand. Elihu is different from the other three friends. Elihu, he confronts Job first by confirming his righteousness. He says, Job, I know you're righteous and upright. I know you do what's right. You're not perfect. You're not blameless in the way that we might think of blameless. But I know that you have not done a sin to cause all of this suffering. But at the same time, he confirms God's justice, regardless of Job's circumstance. He kind of gets in Job's face a little bit and says, you've gotten hostile towards God. You've gotten angry at God because of what he's done and what your friends are talking to you about. You've blamed God for things that you should not. You've questioned the justice of God, and you can't do that. The book of Job is kind of a roller coaster for Job. Those first two chapters, he doesn't sin with his lips. He's upright. He's blameless. He does everything. But as you read even into chapter 3 and following, Job starts questioning, why, God, would you do this? We know that Job cannot be a perfect man because nobody has lived perfectly. And somewhere along the line, we find Job's doubting and sinful heart start to come through. Elihu is sent to confront Job about that. Elihu suggests that you can simultaneously be a good person, strive to love the Lord with all your heart, and suffer greatly. And that doesn't affect God's justice at all. Something that these other friends could not fathom. Elihu says it could possibly be that your suffering has nothing to do with God's justice whatsoever. Hello. So Job chapters 32 through 37, Elihu is sharing with Job this confrontational, convicting speech. And instead of Job getting to respond, he never does. In chapters 38 through 41, God responds. Instead of Job trying to defend himself, God finally speaks up. And at this moment, we're waiting for God to finally say why this has happened. God, why would you let these things happen? But God never does answer that question. He never says why suffering exists, let alone why Job specifically is suffering. So let me ask you tonight, why do you think there is suffering in the world? Why do you think suffering exists?
I think we become
Okay, so complacency.
So sometimes we have to suffer to get closer to God.
So sometimes the suffering is what jolts us a little bit because we've gotten lazy, complacent, and God uses that to draw us to him. Yeah, I think so.
I also think he uses this to help others.
All right, so sometimes we suffer so we can get through it and help someone else get through it. It's another good reason why suffering exists. Yeah.
I've often, realized you cannot relate to someone if they're going through something. It's so much easier if you've gone through the same thing.
Right. Kind of what Jessica was saying is we sometimes suffer so that we can help others in their suffering. Yeah.
And I think a lot of times too, we suffer needlessly because we blame ourselves for things that have happened and it really wasn't our fault in the first place, or second, or the third, or anything.
And there's a lot of wisdom in that. Sometimes we suffer, and I like that phrase, needlessly. There's no real reason that we ever find why we suffer. And that's really hard to accept, but that's really profoundly true. And what the book of Job is kind of teaching us, sometimes we just suffer. There's no purpose that we know of behind it. I mean, God does, but we don't always know the reason. Sometimes we suffer just because this world is broken, because there is sin in the world and we live in a fallen state. We want to have an answer. Well, I know this will help somebody, or I know this will draw me closer, Lord, or I know, and all those things suffering is used for. But a lot of times we suffer just like Merle said, needlessly, no purpose or no reason whatsoever. This is really hard for us to wrestle with, but that's why the book of Job was written, so we would know that you live in a fallen and broken world. Ultimately, all suffering is because of sin. And I think the Bible clearly...
When sin entered, when Adam and Eve sinned, that was one of the things God
Mhm.
said was going to happen.
Thorns
I mean,
and-
we can just say, we can pick out just the childbirth and different things, but it was a
Weather.
result for
Mhm.
everything.
Weather, event, yeah. The whole world is collapsed now, right? So suffering always exists because of sin, but not always because of
Ours.
your specific sin. There's a really good podcast by John Piper. I couldn't find the title of it. I listened to it months ago, but I really enjoyed, someone had written in a question to him and said, I'm really suffering in this way, or I'm really hurting in this way, and I've been falling in this specific sin. Could it be that my sin is the reason why I'm suffering? What I appreciated about John Piper's response was his answer was maybe. It could very well be that our suffering is due to God correcting our sin. It could be. And so we need to constantly be saying, Lord, what do I need to do to be upright? But it could very well be because he wants to draw us closer to him in some way. Or it could be because he has a purpose for us to share with someone else. Or it could be, as Merle said, just because we're part of a broken and fallen world and it's really needless or pointless. Suffering just exists. But all suffering exists because of sin. These chapters 38, 39, 40, and 41, God spends a good amount of time asking questions of Job. Instead of answering Job, he asks questions, and they're sarcastic questions. One of the reasons why I love these chapters in Job is because I'm a sarcastic individual. I think it's my love language. And sometimes God speaks sarcastically. And in Job 39 or 38 through 41, God often looks at Job and says things like, where were you when I told the sun to rise? Like, what were you doing? When I created the trees around you, were you there? When I put the stars in the sky, what were you doing to do that, Job? So all of these questions of Job, basically to remind Job that he has no idea what God knows. No clue the mind of God. And so the application of the whole book is not to know why suffering exists. The application is simply trust God's plan. Just trust God. He knows when we don't know. When I was growing up, there was a man who was really good friends with my stepdad. He was a lost individual. His name was Tim. I cared about Tim a lot. He was like an uncle to me, almost like another father figure. We were really, really close. Our families were. We would go to hunting camp together out in the Everglades, and Tim was just a ton of fun. But he was as lost as a lost person could be. Not just that he didn't want to know about God, but he didn't want to live a life anywhere close to what the Bible told him to live. As a matter of fact, it pains me to say this, some of my funnest times at hunting camp were when Tim got a little bit inebriated and we went on safaris. It was just a lot of fun. It was. I don't condone it. I don't want anybody to do it. But some of my best memories were Bawana Tim. When he got a little tipsy, he was Bawana Tim. And he'd take that swamp buggy and we'd go explore. And it was a lot of times getting stuck and having to walk back in the middle of the night. There were adventures I'll never forget. I was close with Tim.
No inhibitions.
He loved life and wanted to live it to the fullest. And he often would tell me, he was very wealthy as well. He often would tell me, Trey, I don't need God. There's nothing I need from God. I have everything I need. He was engaged, and now he's married to the woman he was engaged to. They were engaged for better than a decade, I think. But I have a wonderful fiance, a big house that we live in, a thriving business. I can have anything that I want. I'm fine. I don't need religion, and I don't need God. I can remember driving back from camp one time, and I don't know where I had read this illustration, but he was asking me why I wanted to follow God and why he should follow God. And we were having a conversation as a teenage boy, not knowing how to answer a 40-something-year-old man. The illustration that I shared with him, and I don't remember where I got it from, it still is one I like to use a lot. I said, Tim, imagine that you have a friend who literally knows everything about everything. I mean, your friend knows when you wake up and when you lie down. He knows everything about every person. There's nothing he can't solve, no problem he can't figure out. He knows everything. He's infinitely wise. And imagine this friend also can do anything. I mean, he can fix your problem, know how to fix it, but he can manually fix it with his hands. He can overcome any obstacle. There's nothing he can't do. He's all powerful. And imagine this friend who knows everything and is all powerful, cares about you perfectly. I mean, just loves you and wants what's best for you. Like, just really desires for you to thrive. And everything he does, because he knows everything and can do everything, is working towards ultimately your good. Now, if you knew someone who knows everything, can do everything, and loves you perfectly, you know that they want what's best for you and they can do whatever in their power to make you blessed and happy. Wouldn't you listen to the advice they give you? Wouldn't you listen to that person? And of course, his answer was, well, I don't know anybody like that, and I don't want you. But the illustration rings so true. Like, if God knows you perfectly, and he can do anything, and his ultimate desire is for your prosperity in eternity, wouldn't you take his advice? Wouldn't you want to listen to what he tells you to do? Even if you thought it was wrong, wouldn't you go? But he knows it all, and he can make it happen. There's nothing about God that we have to lack faith in. Job chapter 42 is kind of the wrap up, and it's Job's humility. In it, Job repents. We're never told explicitly where Job sinned, but we can see different areas of doubt. And Job falls down and repents before God and says, I know that you're so much stronger and mightier than me. And then the end of the book, we see Job is restored, and he actually has an increased wealth of what he had before. I think something around double of what he started with. God restores Job completely. And we're going to talk about that restoration here in the next couple of weeks as well. But Job learns whether he has a little or a lot, God is in control. He knows everything, can do everything, and we can trust him. That's our summary of Job tonight. And I want to talk about what our future lessons are going to be. But are there any questions or maybe observations of things we've talked about tonight to kind of bring up this evening? Yes, go ahead.
So, you talked about his love for his children and offering the burnt offerings.
Mhm.
Do you think that was sinful? Because he is offering that for them and asking God's forgiveness for them. They're not making that decision.
Sinful for who? For Job, do you think Job was sinful in
Do
it?
you think that he's kind of misled, I guess, maybe in that he thinks that he can receive the forgiveness for them?
I think no, I don't think he's doing it for that purpose. I think he's doing, and the reason why I say no is because he does all of this, and then it tells us, God says, look at Job, he's blameless and upright in what he does. So it wouldn't have told us, here's how here's how Job sinned, and now God's going to say he's blameless and upright. So I've got to say it wasn't sinful. And I think what it maybe even more represents, I'm not giving this a lot of thought, but it's interesting, is there's often in the Old Testament that a priest would make a sacrifice on behalf of the people. It's actually foreshadowing Jesus, who makes the sacrifice in our place. And so Job, I think, is filling that gap, right? He's sacrificing on behalf of his children. Now, was it effectual for his children? Job doesn't even come close to answering that question. But what it does tell us is he was so faithful to God that he covered all of his bases, that he wanted to make sure his family was upright and upstanding. And we don't even know whether Job's children were sinful in their parties, because Job doesn't really know. He says, in case they have. It's not like he says, I know they've been drinking, and I know they've had wild, extravagant women come, and I mean, he doesn't know all that. He says, in case. So I think what it's telling us is that Job is such a devout, righteous man that he's passing that on to his children as well. And
I mean, because like we pray that our children make the right decisions,
Mhm.
but we also understand that we can't take their decisions upon
That's right.
ourselves. Like
We can't.
they have to own up to the things. That
But
they've
remember the
done.
difference between an Old Testament and a New Testament, because in the New Testament, each person can go directly to God, right? Jesus Christ is that sacrifice that Christ did. Old Testament, you always went through a priest, and Job is acting in a priestly role here. On behalf of my children, I'm offering the sacrifice, and it required someone blameless and upright to go to God. It still does, by the way, but we have that blameless and upright person in Jesus Christ. And so now all of us go directly to Jesus on that path. Does that make sense? So I would say, no, Job didn't sin on that. And Job doesn't really talk about that. But now that you've said
It's a
that,
strange concept to
it
kind of
is.
to grasp, you know.
It does make me want to dig in a little bit. And I'm maybe speaking before I study, but I almost wonder if Job is meant to be a foreshadowing of a Messiah figure in doing that. And I can't say he is or not. Let me read some other commentaries, but certainly could be that. That's how righteous we're to look at Job, that he is even offering sacrifices in priestly role. That's a really good question. You know what? I'm going to add it to my list, and I think there's a week we can talk about it in more depth. Other questions that come up from tonight, or maybe from discussions about Job?
I just wonder this, we'll have to go back a little bit, what we're talking about tonight. This fellow that liked you so well and spent a lot of time with you, don't you think maybe way deep down, he's just really hoping that some of it will rub off on him?
I hope and pray it has. I don't keep in contact with him anymore, and you know, he still lives in South Florida. I'm friends with his wife on Facebook, but it doesn't appear that they've made professions of faith. But I'm hoping and praying that seeds are planted, and I pray that someone will come alongside and witness to him. He's a good person. He really is a good and generous person, but he's lost.
There's so many of them that are such good people. I don't know why.
And in Tim's case, he didn't think he needed to. He was a good person. He had everything he needed. And this life was all that mattered to him. The next life to him, you die and you're done. So what do you just be the best person you can be on this life? And it's sad. It really is.
Oh, maybe that's one that you need to preach, hell on fire, stone and brim and all that.
We had some good hellfire and brimstone conversations, Tim and I did. But when I was 14 years old, what's a 14-year-old kid going to say to a 40-year-old man that he's going to listen? And he didn't. He tried to influence me the other way. And so this is God's providence in protecting me. But he would always tell me, you're 14 years old. Boy, if I was 14 years old, you know how many women, how many girls I went, Tim, stop. Like, I don't want to know all this stuff. I mean, he was just worldly as could be. But a really nice and good guy, just lost, and it's sad. It's sad. Well, let me talk about the next few weeks, and I don't know if we're going to combine some of these or not. We'll do 3 or 4 weeks. But next week, we're going to talk about a question that the book of Job doesn't necessarily ask directly, but a lot of people ask when they read the book of Job, and that is, how do God and Satan interact with each other? Satan just standing there in the presence of God. Can that be? Does he get to be in the throne room and talk to God? How do Satan and God interact with each other? Job certainly brings it up, doesn't even pretend to answer it, but does the Bible give us an answer? And we're going to look at that next week. Maybe next week, yeah.
God asked him where he's been. God knows where he's been.
Absolutely. My question is, and maybe you can ponder this, study it a little bit, does Satan actually have access to the throne room of God like we read in the book of Job? And I'm going to get ahead of myself. Next week, we'll talk about different thoughts on that. Okay, but if God is perfect and can't look in sin, how can he have a conversation in his throne room with Satan? And we'll talk about that next week. Maybe also next week, or if we go long, we'll push it back a week. We'll talk about the blamelessness of Job. What does it mean that Job was blameless? We know it can't mean that he was sinless, and yet the Bible often speaks of different people who are blameless. And how are we supposed to interpret that? How are we supposed to look at that? The third question we're going to ask, and this will have to have a dedicated week, it's the theme of Job. The question of, is God just, and does he rule with justice? Of course, the short answer is, yes, he does. But let's not just say, yes, he does. How does the Bible teach us about his justice? And what about the people who suffer, and how is that just? And when we look at the question of why they're suffering in the world, we'll deal with it that week. It really does really hit the main theme of Job. And then the fourth week, or the fourth question, whether it's the third or fourth week, there are 2 specific creatures in the book of Job, in Job chapters 40 and 41, the behemoth and the leviathan, that we're going to look at a little bit more in depth. What are the behemoth and the leviathan? What could they be? What can't they be? And why does it matter? And I will say there's a lot of really neat things that we can learn from the behemoth and the leviathan when we think of God's creation. And then I've kind of left it open to, if there are other questions as you ponder the book of Job that you have the next couple of weeks, bring them, ask them. Questions like the sacrifice that Job makes. I'll do a little bit of research, and we'll at the end of each night, if there are questions that we can help answer, we will. Or like this week, I'll do more research and come back the following week. But there are a lot of strange things in Job. I'm going to challenge you to read through the book of Job. And yes, Tracy said he did earlier this year, so you can be off the hook since you've already done it. But if you want to read through it while we do the study, it is repetitive. It's easy to get bogged down. And if you just try to plow through it, you're probably going to find yourself bored and not getting much out of it. But if you'll slowly kind of take your time, read about what's happening, and just take some notes, come with some questions. There certainly are some really difficult things in there that we can talk about, and you can bring those questions as well. So that's all I've got for tonight. I'm going to pray for us, share a couple of prayer requests, and we'll be dismissed. Father, I thank you for the book of Job. Lord, I thank you that it raises questions, and I thank you, God, that we don't have answers to them because it makes us trust you. Lord, I pray that our application of knowing what's going on would be to be like Job's friend Elihu, who was young but wise and could both confirm Job's character and confirm your character, God, without any compromise. Lord, we pray that we would trust your plan regardless of our circumstances, and be with us as we look at tough questions in the coming weeks. Lord, we love and we thank you. It's in your name we pray.